It was one of the few times I fired a client, as everybody knows.
You inspired me.
You know why I fired you? Is because my job is to explain to the council what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how close a relationship you had with some of the councilors, so my ego got in the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Having a beer with Fred is really about getting to people's passion and what makes them tick. Having a beer and having honest, frank, clear conversation that inspires our audience is what it's about.
Cheers.
Brother.
I'm so happy that you're here.
I'm happy to be here with you. And
We have
Treasure Island and
Treasure Island in Florida, not Vegas.
and looking to be back in backdrop.
Well, there's a reason for this backdrop, and you know the reason. I know the reason. A lot of people don't have, memories, right? Like what was. It's in Portland, Maine. When people tell me, I wish Portland like it was 30, 40 years ago. I wish the hill was. I mean, you wouldn't go out at night past 7. You wouldn't let your wife, your girlfriend, or your kids go out at night at that time. But you helped build Maine. You helped build Portland. You helped build community. And for me personally, in Shipyard, we met many years ago. And we're going to talk about those stories. But right now, this is about, in a relaxed way, talking about the past, the present, and the future as it relates to you and entrepreneurship. So for a minute, just give you a full name and spell it. And then I'll ask you a few questions about some of these things that I already know, but I want our viewers to know.
I'm George Campbell, GeorgeCampbell. Down here in the South, I'm often called Jorge, the Spanish George.
Yeah.
I know you're going to ask some questions, but let me just start out by saying, I grew up as a herdsman for a dairy farm in Maine. And I learned, work ethic. We had 100 head of cows. The other thing is that when I was 11 years old, everything burned down.
Oh,
Everything.
your home.
Our home, we lost half.
I never knew that.
And so the first time I was ever on a newspaper, I was on the front page of some local newspaper in Brewer in my underwear. And
We got to get a picture of that.
And that was, likely story. And I'm the oldest of 6, and we were spread out amongst a bunch of relatives. And
At 11 years old.
And I saw at 11, and what I witnessed was how the community came together to build our
Brewing
back
together, yeah?
And they came back, and I remember people coming from everywhere to help raise the barn, roof the house, do whatever it took, because those were pre-insurance days, right?
We didn't have
Insurance was going to
insurance. Was the community.
right, and so that became my big value system. And whether I'm an entrepreneur in business or I'm a leader in government,
Right.
my belief is we have a responsibility to build our community.
Right.
And that's what drives me. And if you look at different things that I've done in my life, that's what's important to me. And then the other thing I want to say going into this, because I want to focus on Portland and the transitions there, and we'll talk about our stories and our interrelationship.
Yep.
But I was so lucky. I graduated Maine and had never had a mentor, didn't really have a good guidance counselor, and I became the town manager of Greenville, Maine. And within my first year, I talked a guy named John Minerio into being my mentor.
My God. I know John.
And John was the city manager of Portland during the Renaissance.
Right.
And he and people like Frank Akers and Howie Goldenfarb and all that crew
Yeah.
took what they knew was an extraordinary location.
Right.
And a great mix of ethnic people, the Italians, the Irish, the Lebanese, all the different, and the French.
Yeah.
All of the different people that had gravitated to Portland and made not just a special location, but wanted to make the built space as special as the natural space that we had.
Right.
And that was the Renaissance period and brought it back. And then, and John Minerio was key in that. In fact, just a few years ago, the city council recognized his role in that and put a plaque right there at Temple Street Park.
Nice.
For John Minerio. So
I had the pleasure of serving with him on the Civic Center board, and there were the story, he and Lenny Nelson together helped build the Civic Center. And
exactly.
Yeah.
And even in his late 70s, he was out working to raise money to pass a referendum to help the Civic Center.
Yeah.
And then the other, I don't think you could talk about Portland without talking about Tony DeMillo.
No, no.
And Tony, and look what he did. He was the first business in Maine to get a lease on the high water in the
waterfront.
Waterfront. To bring the boat up. The ferry. I think from Mystic, Connecticut. I can't quite remember, but he brought. He had a
vision.
And when the banks couldn't see the same vision, he went out and created the Plank Holders Society of people that would donate money and then get.
The community got behind him.
The community got behind him.
Right.
Years later, I was honored to be elected to the city council in Portland and got to be mayor for a while. And in my 6 years, Fred, I only got one call ever, unsolicited call, calling up telling me, "Attaboy, what a great job you're doing." You know who that was? On a Sunday night, Tony DeMillo called me up. Didn't ask for anything, didn't want anything, just appreciated that people at City Hall were trying to make the city different. And that, so you look at those guys and you look at and the other thing we had during that period of time, Fred, and you'll remember it well, the banks were important.
Yeah, they mattered.
They were headquartered.
They got their hands dirty. They got involved in local politics, and you could take that away.
And financing businesses that had the local economy. And now they're all, that yes, you have community banks there, but not the big banking.
It's just not as involved. I mean, people don't live in Portland that they, but at the same time, Portland has benefited, and people come to Portland. It's one of the most visited cities in Maine now, where before it never was a tourist attraction. I appreciate you sharing that early years of George Campbell. Let's go to right today. Today, you work for 2 or 3 different companies, and you work for yourself. So let's give us a little background on who you're working for and with today. Well, as I know you got some development projects that are very entrepreneurial, that are very cutting edge in Augusta, Maine, and you have some other things
we're doing. 2 years ago, I was recruited to work as a business lead for an engineering company, McClure Engineering.
McClure.
MCCLURE Engineering. They're a 68-year-old engineering company with 7 different service levels all the way. They're aviation, airport specialists, water, wastewater leaders. They probably have the best coal, steel, structural engineering group in the nation.
Oh, no kidding.
They do. They have a development.
So how do they find George Campbell? I mean, that's
a former deputy commissioner of mine when I was DOT commissioner in New Hampshire, ended up being with them, and he called me to help him connect Chris Clement. Because they are expanding. That company is about 350 associates, and they're expanding into the east. And so about a year and a half ago, they had a couple of employees, and now they have 45 in New England. We're doing several projects in Maine and in the Northeast.
Yes,
we now have a Boston office, a Portsmouth office, a Portland office, and we're going to be opening up, hopefully either St. Pete or Tampa office.
I would encourage St. Pete.
I have encouraged them like crazy. I might get in here next week. Well, I just think that St. Pete is a great place for a growing company.
Yeah.
You know, because you don't get lost in the shuffle.
Right.
And that's like Portland. You know, Portland's of a size where you can have an impact. So anyway, I work with McClure, but bless them, they let me have my own consulting company, which I call George Campbell Ventures. And I work, my biggest client is Amber Infrastructure. They're an international company out of London and New York and El Paso, Texas. And they do projects all over the world, mostly all infrastructure related. They own a 1,000-bed children's cancer center in Melbourne, Australia. They just finished a $4.8 billion sewer line underneath London, which is
incredible.
16 miles long.
I've been in the subways down there. You got to walk down 15 stories.
And below that.
Yeah, unbelievable.
And they're 21 feet in diameter, 16 miles long. So anyway, they in Maine, I've worked with them to bring them in on smaller projects. And they did the Biddeford Garage downtown as a public-private creative partnership. Yeah. Thanks to the staff and council down there, put a really creative program together. And by the way, Biddeford is the happening place for economic development.
I believe Biddeford's a lot of upside. Yeah,
they had a lot of upside.
What they've done with UNE and what they've done downtown, University of New England.
Exactly. And then you've got a good city council, a good mayor. The manager just retired, but I know they're going to put a great team together. And they work in a collaborative way with business and to grow their community.
Yeah,
and to rehab all those historic mills down there.
Yeah.
So anyway, I worked with Amber. We did that. Then was lucky won the bid to on behalf of AIM-SCIP and Maine Port Authority to build a cold storage facility, which just opened in February.
Yeah.
And it's really doing extremely well.
Yeah.
And so I work with Amber. And then on my own, Dick McGoldrick, another guy that had a lot to do with building Portland up over the decades. Dick had an old strip center, an old Kmart strip center that he couldn't find a good reuse bar, and he put me under contract. I am now under contract on that, and I've been working with the city. We just demolished it. The city council gave my project contract zone change.
Not easy to get.
Not easy to get, but they were really good.
Yeah.
They gave a really creative tax increment financing incentives.
Right.
Because redeveloping that strip center is important to them. And now we've just demolished it as of 2 weeks ago.
Wow. Ready to go and come into Augusta, just near the State House, right?
I know. Yeah, we're 3 blocks from the State House.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be putting the people that are buying the project from me are putting in a nice extended stay hotel.
Yeah.
And then another development team, local LaJoy Brothers, a great entrepreneurial company that you should interview.
Yeah.
They work all over Maine. They're 3rd generation.
Nice.
And they're going to do 50 market rate apartments, probably 40,000 square foot of retail.
Nice.
So there's that project. So those are things I'm busy at.
That's awesome.
And I get to work with you on some projects.
Let's talk about one of the biggest, that not a lot of people know about, but at one point in my career, I worked for one of the largest recyclers in the state of Maine.
Oh, yeah.
It was my partner, friend, Gordon Hirschbees, who owned Consolidated Waste Services, and they had the largest environmentally sound landfill almost in New England, but in the state of Maine, definitely. It was a secure landfill, and we recycled, we pulled out of the waste stream basically everything from cardboard to plastics out of the mills to, heavy-duty recycling. Everybody does their part with recycling for bottles, this, that. Well, we're recycling major things that could come out of the waste stream that historically hadn't, and found uses for them. Metals, all kinds of things. At one point, we had over close to 350 employees in the state of Maine, and you and I met, and we had this aggregate ARC was the name of your company.
Aggregate Recycling Co.
And you had some very interesting partners, right?
I did. Other great people. Mike Doherty, who was DNS, DNS and Ultra Services. He was one partner, and he had this old pug mill.
Yeah.
And he was able to, what we call, take oily dirt.
Yeah, dirty dirt.
And emulsify it, put it in emulsified asphalt, encapsulate it, and then have it in a beneficial reuse.
Yeah.
And the other partner was Skip Keene, Dayton Sand and Gravel, an amazing, another great company out of York, Maine.
So you were a politician,
Yeah.
who'd had a variety of jobs, and up as a partner with two characters. Well, I didn't know Skip as well as I didn't know Mike. Mike was a dear friend, and he had a raspy voice, and so I'll fast forward to you and
Let me just back up. Although you say, how did I get involved?
Yeah, right.
So Mike and I were good friends, and he was telling me about his idea, but he said, we can't, legislatively, we can't be supported in this.
Right.
And he said, I'll give you a third of the company if you can figure out a way to get, this classified as recycled. And I did, and I had the company, and it's successful. Actually, so in fact, it cleaned up all the dirty dirt when they, because that was about the time all the different gas tanks were having to be replaced. But what people don't realize that it got 60,000 tons a year for several years out of the big dig in Boston.
Oh, yeah.
And because we were in Elliott.
Yeah.
Anyway, and that company moved going to.
So at the time, the landfill was in Norridge Walk, Maine, and you and I went to the town council, which the meetings were in the basement of the local bank, and I think it was it was like maybe 600 square feet, the space, and you get up there and put on a little bit of a show, and it was the only time I think I ever got anything approved in one meeting. We walked out of there with the local permit to put the batching plant there, and then we actually got it built in Norridge Walk, and which is up north in northern Maine.
I mean, it hadn't been for you and Gordon, that company would never have existed.
Yeah, we had a good,
because you had a place to be there.
Well, I trusted you, and I trusted, Mike. And in the middle of it, we had what was called a wedge failure, a landslide, in which, because of delays, the area we were digging out around the landfill to expand it, actually, it liquefied, the clay liquefied, and the land broke open, and we had a shift of the land about a mile, which is hard to believe. 6 stories of waste shifted a mile. And I can remember you wanted to get going. And Mike Doherty, I was stuck up there in Norridge Walk in the middle of the summer and dealing with people that were rightfully upset because there was an odor to that waste opening. I remember Mike driving up in his Cadillac onto the site. There's dust everywhere, and he pulls out. I said, Mike, we're going to go for a ride. I throw him in a truck. We go down to the landfill, see the lid, and he goes, Freddie, call me when we can start. And he drove away. Well, we got it up and running. It ran for many years, and you moved it to Elliott. But basically, it was the waste that gassed a lot of the waste, and it was expensive to build that landfill. And one of the things that are happening now is the contamination of farms. They allowed sludge to be shred on farms, and I can remember my engineer going back and saying, listen, there's chemicals in this sludge they're going to have issues with. Because what we were doing, we were mixing sludge with ash from the SD1 burners, and I was kind of the business side of that deal. And it's funny as you go in time and you look at how municipalities sometimes work versus private industry. And I actually tried to sell the landfill to a group of towns in southern Maine at a major discount. Was going to sell the landfill and do a long-time relationship and manage and do all these things. And long story short, they couldn't see their way to do it. And they went for the same price that they were going to buy a licensed operating landfill. They bought a piece of land in southern Maine, the same price, and it never got permitted. And in my lifetime, I've seen a lot of municipalities and towns listen to consultants that don't have the town's best interest always. Sometimes a little more of their own best interest. And then I had an opportunity in Portland, Maine. It was 1992, 93, 94. I'd been growing what was the beginning of Shipyard, KBC down in Kennebunk, and I found a piece of land in Portland, 4 acres, Portland, Maine, that was an abandoned foundry, and nobody had been able to figure out the zoning and the approvals and all the things. And you and I got together, and I asked you if you could help, and you said, yeah, we could, and we got a TIF, tax incremental financing. And I have my vision of that story. You have your vision of that story. But we'll go to the...
It was one of the few times I fired a client, as everybody knows.
You had fired me. You had fired...
You know why I fired you? Is because my job is to explain to the council. This is before I got elected to the city council.
Right.
I explained to the council what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how close a relationship you had with some of the councilors.
My football coach.
Right. So my ego got in the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we came back together, and it was an important, I think.
That case was true there, you know.
Oh,
that was the help.
absolutely.
That would have happened. Yeah.
And you know, and Portland was using some serious economic development tools in the mid-90s, you know, to probably 2010, maybe a little beyond that, really trying to use the tools really creatively.
Yeah.
And you were one of the leads, the Galt building, remember where our Europe went? That had sat there for 13 years, abandoned.
Right.
And we got a tip for that.
Yeah.
Unum expanded because they got a tip. Some good things, you know.
No, overall, you got to look at what did happen versus what didn't. But I think you helped make a lot of things happen. And by us getting that TIF, it led to the Marriott Residence Inn happening, which led to the AC Hotel, which led to WEX coming in, which led to Sun Life coming in. And now what started when the taxes were like $12,000 when we bought the property at 4 acres. And now I would say they get $500,000 a year in tax revenue off that, and creates jobs.
Good quality jobs.
Right.
You know, when you get a WEX in their headquarters, the international headquarters there. The other thing is,
it's easy to look back and say, well, that was easy, but it wasn't easy.
It wasn't, and it shouldn't be in some ways. I mean, I think there should be a vetting. I think there should be a transparency, you know, and councils go through cycles.
Yeah.
You know, the thing that we as entrepreneurs don't give enough attention to is the fact is that Portland is the biggest city in a small state.
Yeah.
And so, believe me, I know. I've worked statewide. I've been a municipal official outside of Portland. I've been president as a municipal. And so what they do is they push a lot of their problems onto Portland.
Right.
And so the council gets elected because Portland's still a small town.
Yeah.
And it's trying to deal
with 90,000 people.
We're the only one.
On a good day, right?
And we're the only 1, 2, or 3 communities in Maine that are actually trying to deal with the homeless problem.
Right.
So we deal with that.
They also invited all the refugees and was a sanctuary. So they create some of their own, let's call them opportunities. They create some of their own opportunities.
The refugees that we brought in that were asylum seekers,
they won't let them work. They can't work.
But they can't. But that's a federal problem.
Well, somebody's got to.
They can't work for 6 months.
Yeah.
They're asylum seekers. But the point is, look at how many businesses have come out of you want to talk about entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
You know, many of these people, I remember the first time I ran for city council, I had this Afghanistan family that were naturalized citizens living on Munjoy Hill.
Yeah.
And man, they helped me so much. I can't begin to tell you. I got to know, they were driving taxi cabs and things like that, right? You know what they were? They were civil engineers in there.
Yeah.
You know, we don't mask it.
No, we need to embrace immigration legally,
Legal
way in a way that speeds it up, because there's a lot of we have close to 60 Jamaicans come and go with the visa program, and they're the greatest people in the world. They become friends. They support our communities. We support theirs with different things that happen with the hurricanes, vice versa. But
And then look at our agricultural community, Lyman's down east. You know, how
we need,
they
especially right now at a federal level, we need to streamline, people that are willing to come to America and work, and a vetting process. Maybe they used to sponsor immigrants, like instead of us paying $10,000 to a lawyer to get in visa people, how about we sponsor a business puts up $5,000 or $6,000 per employee, and if they some proof that they're not a criminal, some proof that they're going to have a pathway to citizenship. I'm all for America needs people at all levels and all economic positions, right?
I'm a descendant of immigrants.
Well, yeah, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, I do think that the closing the border to illegals is critically important.
Right.
I think that's being done better now.
Right.
I think getting rid of the criminal element.
Right.
I think the problem is we overstate the problem.
Right.
And so then we get into a political warfare.
No,
because I think anybody would like, any American, no matter where their political stripe is, would be willing to say, I want the criminals out of here.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But the argument becomes, what's a criminal?
Yeah.
And what is it? And what's the process? So anyway, the point is, bringing in the refugees, I think, was another indication of Portland history and legacy of.
Yeah, and you can look at it that way, but when you don't have a plan and they're not managed and they're not managed, that's where I get upset, because you need to have well-run. I think that existing Mayor Dion is doing the best he can to run the city now, where under others it was just, I would call it complete mismanagement. It was just like the Civic Center, the Expo. Let's put them in the Expo. Forget the fact that some people had events planned. A friend of mine had a event planned there, and they didn't really care. So consequently, his private business put economic dollars at risk, got booted out because they put him in and it was a mess at the Expo.
Of course it was. No.
So let's talk about.
I agree that there's a good advantage. Well, just like when you bring in your people, you have to manage them.
I have to buy housing. I have to pick them up we pick them up at the airport. We make sure they'll show up with no jackets when they go to Sunday River. So
anyway,
gonna close. So there was a guy, a politician who was, in my opinion, if he was a politician in today's world, it'd be a like kind of a left-wing Republican, not a right-wing Republican. And one of his favorite lines was, "The best social service program is a job." Who was that?
Well, the Democrat that used to say it was Joe Brennan.
Right. So Joe Brennan was the first politician I ever supported. A friend of mine, Mike Liberty, did a fundraiser for him. You became a strong leader within his administration.
I never met him until my interview, and I ended up being the head of economic development for the state.
Which is a big job.
And then 9 months later, commissioner of transportation.
Right.
State.
Right.
And worked with that guy that he's smart, really smart, and had great common sense. And he was a conservative Democrat. Believe me.
Yeah.
He cared about social justice.
Right.
And he lived by Hubert Humphrey's philosophy that the moral test of society is take care of those in the dawn of life, the children, those in the dusk of life, the elderly,
right,
and those in the shadows of life, the poor and disabled. That's how Joe thought.
Disabled, being underwritten, right?
Yes.
In America with opportunity, you can almost do anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so anyway, but he did a lot for Maine. But who are the politicians that really helped Portland over the years? the Jack Dawsons, the, Tom Allen was
Peter O'Donnell helped me.
Peter O'Donnell.
Brought some sanity to some of the, never forget it, the guy wanted me to, somebody from City Hall said, well, before you get your approvals, you got to do a study, and I want you to hire this guy at $30,000. I called Peter up, said, Peter, I can barely afford, the 2 employees. I got to get aboard a study on something I know is going to work. And he straightened it out, and he allowed for a unique situation on getting approvals to get in there and get working. But,
and then you had, before we go away, I mean, it's dangerous to name people, but you got Nick Mamadona with decades. You got Cheryl Lehman.
Yeah.
So many good.
No, and unfortunately, and I love the state of Maine. I love the city of Portland. But when you travel and you see communities that are pioneering growth and business programs and things, I feel like we're handcuffed to a degree on high taxes in Maine, high income taxes. And, my son-in-law is an emergency room doctor. And at one point I was trying to get him to move to Maine. And he said, if I was going to leave Massachusetts, I don't want to pay 3% more in Maine to be a doctor and make less money. He said, that's crazy. And I had to agree with him, right? So I think there's things in the state of Maine, at one point, there were different people I talked to and said, listen, maybe what we do is we increase sales tax from June 1st to October 15th and do some way where we lower state income taxes, because there's a lot of business people that can't find good help because they don't want to pay the higher taxes. And it costs a lot more to live in Maine today than it did ever, right? The cost of living from gas and other things. That being said, Maine's a great place to start a company because you got innovative, good people. We got 3 or 4 great colleges that, from University of Maine system to the Colby, Bates, Bowdoin, and University of New England. And we got a lot of young talent, but we lose a lot of it because the opportunities are not as good as they could be.
Well, I just want to put in a pitch for 2 others. I think University of Southern Maine is really, they don't
come a long way.
Oh,
come a long way.
It's amazing.
I don't think my real estate license. I think they ought to bring the real estate program back. Without them,
they've got one of the best insurance, underwriting programs.
Yeah.
They're the biggest nursing program in Maine.
Right.
They have extraordinary.
What better place to do school than Maine, or Maine especially?
So USM, I think, is important. I also think that Northeastern and Rue Institute,
huge.
It's really going to help the whole state of Maine.
Everybody says I'm an optimist, but you're 10 times more an optimist than I am, because you look at all the positives all the time, and you've had a lot of challenges. It hasn't been easy all the time.
I believe I've learned a lot about economic development since 1971 when I've had to be involved in it. And the Federal Economic Development Administration for years and years and years was all about trying to look at the weakest, the furthest behind, and invest money in it.
Yeah.
What I've learned is you really got to invest where the strength is.
Right.
You wouldn't take your personal money and put it into a dying company, would you?
Right.
You put it into a company that's going to go somewhere. And that's where our programs have got to be aimed to helping that. Of course, we've got to help the communities that need an extra hand. But, how do we take away barriers from the community that's going to be our economic engine?
Right.
And that when I talked earlier about Biddeford, that's what I mean. That's a growing city.
Well, Westbrook and Biddeford have come a long, long way, and they've taken advantage of the disadvantages and made them advantages.
Yeah, and look at Brunswick Landing.
Yeah.
What went on there, when that base closed and what's happened, so you take that whole region.
Yeah.
And then if you spend any time going up coast of Maine,
right,
you find pockets of resiliency like in Rockland, Rockport, Camden.
Right.
Then you go into Belfast. In 1979, right, I'm the freshly minted head of economic development.
Yeah.
On August 1st of 1979, September 1st, 6,000 chicken farming jobs were lost in Maine.
Oh, yeah.
Boom. Belfast was the epicenter. It was destroyed as a community, right?
Right.
now go to Belfast.
Yeah.
If anybody hasn't been to Belfast, go and see.
Belfast, Maine, USA.
Am I
Yeah.
optimistic?
Yeah.
Because I believe that just what you do, there's an entrepreneurial spirit and a work ethic in Maine. And I think that we attract people over time because you got to have some perseverance
Oh, yeah.
if you're going to live in Maine.
No, you got
got weather issues, you got business, you got plenty of headwinds.
No, yes.
So, what do they say? If you can they used to say, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere.
Yeah.
You make it in Maine, you're going to make it anywhere. And so I think that's,
You're going to have a lot of fun. Maine is a fun place.
and I think now Portland, just to go back to Portland for a minute, Fred, I think two things. Jim Brady, when he was involved with the Foresight Project with Casey Prentice and Kevin, they had a referendum initiated against their project, right? And so Jim called me up and asked me if I'd be the treasurer of that campaign. And they hired Lisa Whitehead of WTF to be the campaign manager.
Yeah.
We won every single precinct in the city. Is that because we're geniuses? No. That's because the citizens of Portland want our city to continue to be strong and economic so that your son can come or your daughter can work here and that they can grow here. So I look at that, I look at when the citizens get a chance to really speak.
Yeah.
What do they say? They say, we want opportunity in Portland. The other thing that I see, and I have nothing to do, I am working on the Foresight Project. I was not just treasurer, but McClure Engineering is working for Casey Prentice, the Foresight Group now. And remember earlier in our conversation, I mentioned Howie Goldenfarb? He's a visionary.
I don't know quite.
Most people in Portland don't even know him, don't even know who he is
Right.
or heard of him.
Right.
He did extraordinary projects all over the southern Maine, including South Portland
Yeah.
and other places. Now he's brought Live Nation to Portland.
That's huge.
And, they're not asking anything from the city except to be fairly treated under the regulations of the city, right?
Yep.
And what it speaks to is that they could see that Portland's at another inflection point, right?
Right.
And instead, what they're getting from a lot of other venues, which I've supported, I was on the council when we did Merrill Auditorium. I was one of the key fundraisers for Merrill Auditorium. I did talk to PD, by the way, another guy, PD Merrill.
That poor guy died the next day after that hearing.
Yeah, but what he did...
It's actually happened, what he vision was.
Right, and envisioned for the waterfront.
Yeah.
But anyway, I see that as a recognition that we can bring a lot more to support the infrastructure we have of hope.
So we got a deep water port. We're 200 miles closer to Europe or the England than New York City. We've got a lot of natural resources. It's good stuff.
So there's that. And then I think is this Solely project, East Brown Cow. I think those are two projects that are trying to envision how we move forward.
Next.
Let's get back and talk.
Cheers to the fact that we're both still standing. There's a lot of us that aren't here anymore.
Noah. Yeah, cheers to that. My God,
it's dangerous, but you've always looked forward. You've always, and I you're a realist, but at the same time, you're looking for an angle or an opportunity to build on something that's true. What you've been saying and talking about is true and real, and there's substance. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that the people that want to get behind, and again, talk about Joe Brennan, take care of the young, take care of the old, and the people that are less fortunate and disabled. That's my belief as well, and how our company tries to give back to things that, that are disadvantaged or people having a tough time. You've had a lot of experiences giving back. I mean, what have been some of the best nonprofits you've been involved in?
Well, I've been involved in so many, but I guess the two top ones, I've been chair of the Martins Point Healthcare Board. I was on that board for 12 years. And then the one that I take a lot of pride in was I was the vice chair and then chair of the Gulf of Maine Research Institute when that got built.
Yeah.
So those are great. I've been involved in the arts communities, was on the symphony board, things like that. So, and then, of course, near and dear to my ethnic heart is the Irish Heritage Center.
Yep.
Because you just said I look forward. A lot of us can look forward.
Yeah.
But we have a responsibility, if we want to look forward, to understand the past.
Honor the past, right?
Right? And honor it, understand it, learn from it.
Right.
And, so many people don't. They just look at the current situation and they interpret that, as what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah.
In other words, you can't continue to build the strength of a state or a community if you haven't got a foundation of some success.
Right.
And so those, I'm glad you raised the nonprofits. The other ones, I've been on Portland Landmarks. Yeah. I applaud you, Fred. I know you've done a huge amount for Portland Trails.
Yeah.
With your race trails there.
Yes.
That, I don't know how much money that's raised over the years, but
made people aware for sure.
And made them aware.
Yeah.
And the importance, and I think the Green Trails and Blue Edges program of the city. And then now I think the city made a really smart move over the last few years by creating an overall parks commission.
Yeah.
Because I was chair of the Eastern Prom park. I was president of Friends of the Eastern Prom.
Which is beautiful.
We raised a lot of money.
Yeah.
But I think that great open spaces and parks make a city.
Yeah.
I think culture makes a city. I think education. So you got to ask yourself, if we want to be a great city, we want to be a great state.
Yeah.
Do we have great institutions of education?
Yeah.
Do we honor our cultures and our cultural institutions? Do we value our open space land like Roxanne Quimby has done for the Northern Woods, right? To spare money.
Yeah.
If you go back and you study history of Portland and you see what James Binney Baxter did, do you realize he was elected mayor 3 or 4 times and defeated 3 or 4 times in the late 1800s, early 1900s, because he wanted to preserve Back Cove and the industrialists wanted to fill it and build industry on it.
Yeah.
And he brought in Olmsted to do the trail. And
I think we used to dredge it. I think we should dredge it, make it a little more useful. Yeah. That's what Howard Goldfarb wanted to do. Dredge it, put up a bigger bank and yeah, no.
Listen, the point is that it got, it got preserved. So we could dredge it if we wanted to in the future.
Well, the younger people, the people that are coming up do need to recognize the past and the heritage. And the thing about Maine is it's so diverse, right? From Portland to, Fort Kent to, Bethel to wherever we're fortunate that way.
I think there's that, but it also goes back to what my opening comments were. I want to see people attracted to our community or stay in our community to do a good job or create a business that involve themselves in community.
Yeah.
You can make plenty of money running Shipyard and Gray Dog and all the other things you have.
Yeah.
You don't need to help the community.
Yeah.
You don't need to give, but important, not just for you individually, but for the community. So I think I'm glad you raised that. And I think the state of Maine and the community of Portland do a good job. I think
I think they do a good job. I hope we can do a better job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now I read David Turn's comments the other day. David Turn, another great entrepreneur in our city who you were in interview.
Yeah.
And
up there. Well,
and he was just in city council the other day, fleeting about how we've lost Monument Square.
Right.
You know,
Which is the most valued asset of the city. It was
you know what? You
center of
about
Portland. Yeah.
tourists coming in. Well, how many ships a year come in now?
Right. They never make it up there.
No.
Or because of that.
And no, but I mean they could,
Yeah.
but they don't.
Right.
And it's, you lose your community on the edges. It doesn't happen all at once.
Yes.
And it's on the edges. And remember Giuliani when he took over New York years ago? Right. I'm not talking about the crazy Giuliani today. I'm talking about the prosecutor Giuliani.
I can't wait for the movie. That's
on a starring role in that one.
Jesus.
I have a really good friend who was the commissioner of DOT, secretary of DOT in New Jersey. Jim Simpson, great guy, also head of the Federal Rail Association for America.
Yeah.
Giuliani was the best man at his wedding.
Oh, nice.
And but anyway, but when Giuliani became mayor, what did he do? He went after all the graffiti on the subways.
Yeah.
Went after,
Cleaned it up.
And no boarded windows. Thing. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Organized.
But he went after it.
Yeah.
And it made a difference. And I think you lose your community by some of those things. I do think the other thing in Portland to understand that politics shifted dramatically with the last charter change.
Yeah.
So now we've created a system for the good or the bad where the manager and the mayor have got to understand their roles.
They'll work as a team.
But work as a team.
Yeah.
They can't be, and that's going to take time to evolve. But I think Danielle West and Mark Dion get it.
Both very good people.
Yeah. Good people.
Yeah.
They get it.
Yeah.
And they work together. And I think the council, there are a lot of voices on the council.
Yeah.
Tip too far one side or the other, I don't know.
I want efficiency. I just want, there are things in Maine that are so great, but it gets overcomplicated. Like my daughter has a bee Ginger, and she's getting a permit for a little 800-foot space, and it's been 6 months and it's something that's going to cost, she's going to end up being like $8 or $9 grand in for approvals, because it's a space you never would have had to do full drawings for engineering. Also, now you got to do that. And I don't know how these young entrepreneurs are going to get stuff done without going broke on some of these things. And it's crazy because, I think that we've created trying to get a no-risk situation on the municipal side. And I see it here too, where the approvals to get buildings built and things done, if it's a high-rise or something that needs a lot of engineering, great. But if it's a little renovation with one overhead hood, you don't need full. And I go up. And but the process is so hard to understand and convoluted, and sometimes even and I just think somebody there, maybe it's, like you said, it's the city manager and the Mayor Dion working together to simplify things that should be simpler, And I one time put a tent on Peaks Island, and it literally took me 3 months to get it. It was the middle of August. I had a wedding that was happening in like a week. I finally went down. I said, listen, I am not leaving if I walk out of here with a permit, right? I had to put a French drain in. I had to do all these things you never would have done 30 years ago. And then it went from all you need is a little drawing to we want full surveys. We want that. And long story short, it just doesn't protect the public at the level they want.
Well, let me, you use the word efficiency, and I think it oversimplifies the situation. After I left being commissioner of transportation in Maine in 1984, I went to work for a guy named Tim Millen.
Yeah.
Heard that name?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Railroad, planes, trains, automobiles.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I went to work for him, and I was president of his intermodal company.
Yeah.
His national intermodal company. And then when I left to come back to Maine, what people don't know is Governor Brennan appointed me to the Board of Environmental Protection. So people just think about me as the development side.
Yeah, you both work.
So I was on the board, right?
Yeah.
And what I learned and what I believe today is there are three roles of an environmental agency.
Yeah.
The first role is to build regulations, right?
Right.
Implement the law.
Right.
That should be collaborative. That should be all the stakeholders coming together, all sides, so we get some regulations, right? The second is permitting. And the permitting should be customer service oriented.
Yeah.
In other words, you come in for a permit, I'm the regulator, I'm helping you.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to make you guess what you got to do.
Right.
Third is enforcement.
Yeah.
It ought to be swift, it ought to be even, and, for people step aside.
Right.
So anyway, that's my belief, and that should happen at the city level and the state level, and it doesn't happen. It's not a question of efficiency. It's a question of each of those three buckets has a role to play. What DEP did do years after I left, what DEP did do, which was good, was they created a system called permit by rule, meaning, well, they did two things. One, they designated site planning, what they call site location and development application.
Yeah.
They designated it to qualified cities.
Right.
So I got that up there. And then for the ones that weren't delegated, they created, and I don't know how to explain the level, but for minor permits, you write your own permit.
Yeah.
And then they audit it randomly, just like IRS. You submit your thing, they're going to audit you if you screw up.
Right.
Or, randomly. So I think that Portland, because of the pressure it gets, the development, ought to really, and I advocated this for years. Nobody listens.
Yeah.
At least you'll listen.
I'll listen.
They should create a permit by rule.
Right.
And so something like your daughter's dealing with, she'll go in, you fill out the permit, you say you're going to do it the way they tell you you're going to do it. Right?
Do it. Yeah.
And then they audit 1 out of 10 of the permits randomly.
They go from there.
Right?
So that's too much common sense, right?
But the point is that they're tying the whole system up.
Yeah.
And so when they say they're short-staffed,
speed up the system by,
So
no, I couldn't agree more. And that's common sense, which you've always been about. Listen, it's been a pleasure. We're going to do this again.
All right.
We're going to do another one. Cheers.
Right.
You're the best, my friend.
You're the best.